Hello, this is Michael Donahue again, and we're going to talk about content or message in painting today. Many of you students will notice that when you get an evaluation sheet in my class, that there'll be a part at the bottom that I'm going to ask you to talk about your message or your content in your painting. And so this ought to give you some clues on what to write about. I like for students to think about why they choose the things they choose. Painting is not just about making images. It's all about expressing an idea. Painting is a way of communicating an idea. It's your worldview of something. And many artists are inspired by events, objects, relationships, something that's happening in the world. And art is a wonderful reflector of that. So we're going to talk about that in painting for a few minutes. So I'm going to talk about some personal experiences I've had with content and help to explain a couple of images today. A lot of students, the first thing they have to do is think about, well, what am I going to paint? And that's important. You have to think about that. But more importantly, what is it about something that inspires you? And maybe you need to be inspired. That's something you need to think about. You have to be open. You have to be willing to be moved by something. A sunset can move you. Most people drive down the highway. Some people like myself will pull off the road and take a picture of it where I can recall it, remember it, savor it. And what is that message? What's the message of that painting? Well, it's a message about the beauty of nature and the colors of nature. That's what the painting can be about. My love of that. It's not that I like landscapes. It's that there's something beyond that. And that's what I'm looking for. What is the meat? What is the meaning? What is the message? And that's what content is, the message of a painting. How do you express that? That's the hardest part of a painting, is coming up with a wonderful idea, one that inspires you and one that inspires other people that look at your paintings. So we're going to look at a couple of slides. Let's talk about, again, the idea of what a content is. Content, as I mentioned, is the meaning or the message in a painting or an artwork. So often, beginning students do not think about this aspect of painting, but it should be one of the first things you think about. What do you want your painting to express to the viewer when you're not around to explain it, when you're dead and gone? When people walk into a gallery or museum 100 years from now, what are they going to say when they look at your painting? What was this person thinking? What inspired them? Is it just a painting about a subject you like? Or can it be more profound and expressive as being a human being and something you think about? It should be your worldview of something and explore your personal belief systems. Good painters attempt to balance good ideas and good techniques. Some students that I have really good ideas, but they have really a hard time communicating it because they have poor technique. They don't know how to use their paints. Other students that I have wonderful technique. They really can paint almost anything, but their ideas don't use much of an imagination, and they're not very personal. What really is wonderful in painting is when you have that perfect balance of the idea of a really good idea, but you also have really good technique. And what I'm hoping to do in this class is to help you with both of those things. But content is one of those things you have to think about yourself. What really moves you to paint something? We're going to go to another slide here. As I mentioned, it's important to find something that inspires you on an emotional level. Think about that when you select a subject matter. Content is not just a description of what is in the painting. I have a lot of students who say, I like flowers. This is a painting of a red flower with a blue background. That's not content, folks. That is a description of the painting. Don't give me that. Give me what is a little deeper meaning behind that, if you can. Why did you paint it? What's it trying to say to the viewer? Here's a great example, especially during a pandemic like COVID-19. This is a painting that was done in 1562 by Peter Bruegel, and it's called The Triumph of Death, done in oil paint on a panel. And when you look at this painting, it's got a lot of stuff going on in it, but you'll notice that there are images of death everywhere, hundreds and hundreds of skeletons. And these skeletons are doing things to human beings. Bruegel was watching thousands of people dying in the streets around him. It moved him. It inspired him. It made him think about something deeper. How do you get across the idea of death? Well, skeletons are one way to do it. We do it at Halloween every year as a symbol, as an image. But in this particular case, there is a message. There is content to this painting, which can be found in Madrid, Spain, by the way, in a famous museum called the Prado. This is Bruegel's attempt to show that death is the great equalizer. No matter who you are, death is going to take you. Whether you're a king, like the fellow in the left-hand corner, or whether you're a jester, or a warrior, or a musician with lots of talent, you're all going to die. Death will eventually triumph. And that is what he's trying to say in this painting. And I think if you really ponder and you stand in front of this painting and absorb all the things you see there, that you understand that this is more than just a painting about a bunch of skeletons. It has content. Now, what I'd like to do is talk about a couple of paintings that I have here that were inspired by events, things that happened during my lifetime. In 1986, one of my painting sculpture professors at Stephen F. Austin State University, John Daniels, had a piece censored. It was a big metal sculpture, and it was a public sculpture. It was in Longview, Texas. And this particular piece was called Night Winds. It was a big abstract metal tree, very, very passé, abstract, black, a tree. The whole idea was night winds. The idea, if you've ever been in East Texas, of the winds blowing through the trees. Well, this piece of public art in 1986 was attacked. It was attacked by a group of conservative people. Some of them were, we call them religious zealots to a certain degree, but they believed it was the work of Satan. It was black. And there was actually a movement started by a group of people there in East Texas to have it removed, even though it was on the campus of Kilgore College in Longview. During the middle of the night, the college bowed to the pressure of this small group of people who didn't understand the sculpture, didn't understand the content, didn't understand art in general. And in the middle of the night, they came with a welding torch and they cut it down where no one could see it happen. It was gone the next day. It was censored. It was hidden away where no one could see it. Of course, it was a terrible affront to the artist who had created the public work. It was outraged. There were outraged students who protested against this artist. This made national news. The censorship of a piece of art, a harmless piece of art that was taken down in the middle of the night and hidden away. I was living in Europe at the time, and I remember hearing this story because it was making national news in the United States. I came back to Texas, and I live in Belton, of course. And one of the things that I began to do as a historian is read about the local history of Belton. And Belton had, in its past, and to a certain degree, and that's what the painting is about, certain attitudes about people, about places. And you may not know this, but Belton was actually the site of the last public execution in the state of Texas, right here in our hometown. And the whole thing got me to thinking about, one of the stories I read was about a black man by the name of Gentry who was lynched in the town square. Most people don't know about this story, but that's what happened to Mr. Gentry. He was lynched. I won't get into the details because it was horrible. But it made me think about, again, a person, because they were different, because they did something perhaps wrong, they were lynched in a terrible manner. And I began to think about my Sunday school classes, and of course, one of the greatest acts of censorship was, of course, Jesus Christ hanging on a cross. This particular piece, which is my biggest piece ever created, 6 feet by 9 feet, and it took 1 year to produce this piece, called the Bell County Crucifixion, all on canvas. This particular piece is an allegory, and in reality, it has nothing to do with Jesus Christ per se. It's not a religious piece, but it does refer to that act of censorship by the scribes and the Pharisees and the Jews who actually hung Jesus Christ on a cross. Now, this is not about Jesus. This is not a religious painting, but it makes an allegory. It makes a reference to, again, a person who was in essence lynched by mob activity and was censored for what he had to say. So I always look at the crucifixion of Jesus Christ as an act of censorship. He was not allowed to say what he wanted to say, and he was killed for that reason. Not so different than that particular piece of sculpture that was taken down in East Texas. So I saw a relationship. So I did not want to make it a racial piece. This is not about race divisions. This is not about black, white. This is about censorship. And what I began to notice about people in Belton who had come across is a lot of them had the same attitudes about people who are different. And the particular person on the cross is anybody. He is a symbol for anybody who is different. And it's hard to be different in Bell County because you're very quickly censored or you're very quickly put down. And so what I did was I played off some stereotypes. But they are stereotypes that I really do see in Belton, Texas. For instance, I have my little gossips over here. These are actually a couple of my students who posed. And they're over here talking about what this person has done. Again, this could be a sculpture they're talking about, like Night Winds. A person who shows up just to take pictures. A person who's into the media part of this thing and the exploitation of the event itself. The news media. We know how important the news media is today. And KCN, Channel 6 News, actually came out and did a story on this painting. This is actually a photograph, and I used them as part of the media response to this particular episode, this event, which could happen in Bell County. Again, someone strung up for being a little bit different. Policeman here, an allegorical reference to the Roman soldiers who stood by and did not do much to help a person hanging on the cross. In this case, in Belton, the vigilante episode was basically just let happen. If you look very carefully at the officer's sunglasses, you will notice something strange. There's not one cross, there's 3 crosses. You are also hanging up at the same level as the man on the cross. So you're strung up. You're from the viewpoint. I wanted to put the viewer into this particular viewpoint perspective of you're looking down at all these people, and they're looking up like you're one of the 3 thieves or the people on the cross. A good friend of mine posed. Again, a lot of these are friends of mine. This is a good friend of mine, and he's playing a role here. It's important to remember that. He's the Bubba Redneck. He's the guy taunting the guy on the cross. Again, an allegory again to the crucifixion of Christ, taking his Lone Star beer and taunting the man on the cross. During this particular period when I did this painting, a lot of the TV evangelists were falling like flies. And what I mean by that, they were being exposed as hypocrites. They were holding their Bibles, they were beating their Bibles, they had their slick down hair, their big jewelry. And again, this is a friend of mine who posed for that role. These are like actors in a play. This, believe it or not, is a collection of probably 20 photographs composed into one composition. The person on the cross, you ready for this, is a carpenter. Okay, he's a friend of mine. His name is Ed. And then I have my last person over here who originally had a tennis racket. She's kind of my yuppie, one of my Hispanic students, wonderful person named Irma. Turned out to be a wonderful graphic designer. Has University of Texas School of Law. Again, kind of a young lady who seems to be aware of what's going on but doing nothing to change things. Probably coming back from a tennis game, but I left the tennis racket out. Just didn't fit with this particular painting. So this is the Bell County crucifixion, the storm coming up. Again, lots and lots of references to a crucifixion, but a contemporary crucifixion. So did I have any message here? What do you guys think? Did I think about this? Did I think about message and content? Now, are you going to read it the way that I said it just now? Probably not unless you know the story. But I think anybody on a level of any kind of artistic understanding realizes that there's a message here. And whether you understand what the message is, after me explaining it, that probably helps a little bit. But this painting has content. And I want you to think about that when you begin to paint a painting. That needs to be one of the first things you think about. This is a very recent painting done of my sweetheart, Carolyn Bennett. And this is a life-size portrait. And Carolyn was working at Scott & White during the COVID-19 outbreak. She had a very stressful job. One of her jobs is an administrative assistant in the ER area. She was in charge of not only payroll, but helping to get the supplies badly needed for the doctors at Scott & White. And I would see her come home a lot of times in her scrubs, just worn out, tired, and frustrated by the lack of not only help from the public, because people were coming into the hospital who weren't behaving, but she was having to wear a mask all day long. This is just, I think it's just, it really captured her. I asked her to come home one day. She was tired, she was worn out, and just in her scrubs, the one she wore, beautiful combination of colors, and this beautiful mask that one of our friends from Ireland made for her. And I love the fact, she's a beautiful woman, but I love the fact that the face was covered. It kind of reminds me of a Magritte painting. Magritte sometimes did portraits of men with bowler hats with an apple in front of their faces. You don't actually see the face of the person. And so there's almost a reference to Magritte's work in this, but she's covered, which we're all being covered right now. And the content of this is, again, about the heroic aspect of being an executive administrator at Scott & White. And I had to capture this in a moment in time and place. And you can see there's tiredness in her eyes. I had her pose with her arms crossed because that is a pose of resilience and resistance. So again, there's an expressiveness not only in the gesture, but in the facial features in this particular portrait. Again, a very inspired painting. I love doing it. And this is just another example of content in a painting. So as a student, I want you to think more about why you choose the things you think. Don't just let it be something, it's a project. I'm just painting something. Start thinking about why you paint the things you do and what you want to communicate to people that look at your artwork. Happy painting.